Members of the planning board, please state your name and indicate you're here. Let's do it in alphabetical order, starting with Clark Brewer. Clark, could you unmute yourself to do that?
Clark Brewer, here.
Thank you. Tom Callahan?
I am here.
Paul Caleri?
Paul Caleri here.
Paul Grady?
Paul Grady here.
Eric Potter?
Eric Potter here.
And then Amy Glassmeyer. The first item of business is a large house review, and I would request that Paul Grady, as the clerk, reads the public hearing notice.
You ready?
Yes, we are.
Notice of public hearing, Cohasset Planning Board. Pursuant to MGL Chapter 40-A and Section 300-5.4 in the Cohasset zoning bylaws, and the planning board will hold a virtual public hearing on Zoom, webinar ID 820-2413, 6046, password 588484, on Wednesday, October 21st, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. for a large house plan review for a property being shown on Cohasset Assessor's Map C1-10-91, 28 Linden Drive, Cohasset, Mass. 02025. The application is for the construction of a RGFA 4,539 square foot single-family residence. The application is submitted by EMBR Architects. A copy of the application and application and plans and accompanying documents are on file on the town clerk's office at Cohasset Town Hall, 41 Highland Avenue, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m., and Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Virtual copies of application material can be requested via email to Planning Director Lauren Lind at lllind@cohassetmass.org, cohassetma.org. Any person interested or wishing to be heard on the application should access the virtual meeting at the time designated. Signed, Amy Glassmeyer, Chair, Planning Board.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. So the meeting will proceed in the following order. The applicant will present, members will comment, the public will comment, and then the members will choose how to proceed. Let me ask Lauren Lind to please let the audience know how it is that they communicate should they wish to offer something during this discussion.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. For those of the members of the public who wish to speak, we would ask that you use the question and answer section down located at the bottom of your screen. If you could input your name and your address, and then we can take your comments as they are entered that way during public comment period.
Thank you. So in terms of the applicant presentations, if the individual speakers would please introduce themselves in the order that they're choosing. I would suspect that, but I don't know what order the presenters wish to follow. So if you would indicate to me by the first person interested in speaking, raise their hand, that would be helpful. All right, thank you very much. Mr. Roccino, is that correct?
Well, that's the correct Italian way of saying it, or we can Americanize it to Rossino. Either way is fine.
All right, thank you very much. If you would please introduce yourself, we would appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Michael Rossino. I'm the principal and owner of Ember Architects, and I'm here representing the homeowners, Eric and Tina Bowman. And I'm happy to start. I'm happy to kick it off, and then I'm going to pass it to Jeff Hassett of Morse Engineering after I'm done, if that's okay.
Thank you.
I have a narrative that I wrote that is in the package that I'm going to try not to read verbatim. So I'll try to go through this quickly. It breaks things down into context, style, material, design approach, lighting, screening, shadows, and then some key points. Should I be sharing my screen? Is someone going to present, or how do you want to do that?
Typically, we share the screen with you and then you can direct your presentation.
Okay, that's fine. I don't think I need anything yet. I'll just read through this quickly. We'll start. So I can begin with the context. We know where the address is. It's at 28 Linden Drive. The neighborhood context around varies. It's a mix of smaller capes, gambrels, colonials, and several excellent examples of older homes from the late 1800s to early 1900s. The vernacular of these homes is what we would typically see in Cohasset and other New England coastal towns. There's cedar shingles, that's what the prominent material is. And at least 4 homes out of the 25 also have cedar roofs. The average home area is 3,989 square feet, and the average home FAR is 0.13. The style of the proposed home is designed in the shingle style with a strong focus on articulation of form and the overall massing. And Cohasset itself has many original examples of shingle style homes from the 1800s when it was quite popular, as well as many very new thoughtfully designed shingle homes. The form of the house overall is broken up by using roof dormers, wall recesses, projecting bays, 90-degree intersecting roofs, curved and roof flares, all important hallmarks of the shingle style. The varied forms all work together to create a composition that has depth and character. Basically, we're saying that it's not a box. We've thought very long and hard about the form of this house. The material of the home will be clad entirely in cedar shingles, both on the sidewall and the roof, and the shingles will wrap the form. Corner boards won't be used, but simple, elegant white trim molding will accent all the forms gracefully. Windows will be simulated divided light, white in color, and window scale and proportion is appropriate to the house. Our design approach is, we believe the house is aware of its context, and it's designed to be as sensitive as possible to neighboring homes' scale while still accommodating a growing modern family. An important design feature of this particular home is the emphasis on the massing, which creates a feeling of horizontality rather than being vertical. The street facade has a symmetrical double gable and a wraparound porch. The main roof's fascia and soffit line begins approximately at the top of the first floor walls. The low starting point of the roof, along with the sweeping curved roof of the porch, creates a home that feels low, sturdy, and anchored into the site. Lighting is used considerately to illuminate walkways and entrances and the pool area. The property screens its neighbors by using plantings and fencing. We also have a shadow study that you can look at. Do you have some key points for what it's worth? 16% of the abutters are over the FAR that we're proposing. 28% of the abutters are over 4,500 square feet. 40% of the homes are within 5% of the proposed FAR. And the proposed home is approximately 10% over the average abutter square footage. And the proposed home is 6% over the average FAR. Proposed home is significantly lower than what is allowed by the height as defined by Cohasset zoning. And that concludes what I wrote and submitted as the narrative for this home.
What's the square footage of the house again?
The total square footage of the house is 4,539, I believe.
Thank you. Would you like to share your screen now?
Sure, I can do that.
I think that should just happen naturally to you. Jen, is that true?
Yes,
Or
all
Laura?
panelists have the ability to share.
Okay, great.
All right, just need 1 second.
I can put on some background music, Madam Chair.
Halloween music? I thought I heard a wooing, like a ghost wooing in the background.
It's coming soon.
Okay, should be able to see my screen now. Is my screen being seen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can see
Okay,
it. Thank
Thank
you.
you. I'll begin with these are some pictures of the existing home that's there in place. And these are some existing and proposed images that I think are helpful in understanding what it is that we're trying to do by keeping the form low and keeping everything down. And I'm happy to scroll through anything else or answer any other questions.
Typically, we ask that you go through the materials just so that everyone, it sort of goes into the record and it's acknowledged for the citizens who are paying attention to it, since we're primarily the ones that have the documents.
Okay, certainly, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
The beginning of our presentation starts with, we just looked at these images here. We have a cover sheet. Moving forward, these are the abutters. So this is every home that we looked at, and we've gathered data by just boots on the ground photographs, but also the assessor's cards and some of our own just information of documenting it and photographing every home. We did go around and visit every home specifically. And I'll go through the abutters quickly, but we've documented each piece. When there's a property card, there's a key plan, and then photographs that go through each abutter. From when I spoke previously about the key points, we've created an Excel spreadsheet of just neighborhood statistics that have been taken from the assessor's cards. And that's what this document is. That was where the square footages came from, the percentages, et cetera, that I spoke about. These are existing photographs of the house. I mentioned previously, these are existing and proposed views of the home. These are two-dimensional elevation drawings of the exterior of the home. This is what would be the front. We have a shadow study that we did that has shadows at the equinox and the solstices. There is a lighting key diagram of where the lighting will be located on the home. Also included are floor plans. This is the first floor plan and the second floor plan. as well as the attic. This is the front of the home. This is the right side of the home. The rear. And the left. And that concludes what we've submitted in our presentation.
Thank you. Do you have a landscape plan?
I believe that Jeff Hassett can speak to that from Morse Engineering.
All right. Thank you very much then. Jeff Hassett, would you like to speak?
Sure, thank you. Jeff Hassett here, civil engineer with Morse Engineering. We did the site plan for this raise and rebuild project. Currently, the property, it has minimal landscaping on it currently. There are a few bushes in front of the house, and in the rear, there are 2 trees that are shown on the site plan in red that will be removed. Other than that, there are really no existing trees on the property. What we're proposing for plantings is 5 street trees along the frontage, and then a number of evergreens along the right property line between the property line and the pool. A full landscaping plan has not been prepared for the mulch beds and such at this point. At this point, though, would you like me to give you an overview of the site plan and the site work associated with the project?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the property is about a ½ acre in size. It's developed with a single family home built in 1950. That home is centrally located on the property with a driveway on the left-hand side with a side entry garage. And that driveway is at basement level currently, and they almost forced it when they built the house originally. And so there are retaining walls around all sides of that driveway, which we will eliminate in the proposed conditions. And the property, the majority of the property slopes gently to the back left corner of the property, with a small portion of the property sloping towards the frontage, towards Linden Drive. So the proposed house will be in the same general location, centrally located. It does comply with all of the zoning setbacks. So it's a minimum of 20 feet off of the side lot lines and 30 feet off of the front. As I began to mention before, the driveway, the driveway will be in the same location, but it will no longer be at basement elevation. So that area that was excavated out in the past with retaining walls will be filled back in, and the walls will no longer be necessary. And they're also proposing a semicircle driveway in the front going to the front door. For stormwater, you'll notice there are 2 catch basins proposed in the front left corner. Those will capture the runoff from the driveways, and then it will be infiltrated in a relatively large subsurface infiltration system located under the driveway. It's more of a commercial size system, and it is H20 rated, meaning you can drive vehicles and trucks over it. In addition to that, for stormwater, I mentioned before, the majority of the runoff is going to the back left corner of the property. So in that area, we're grading in a rain garden that will capture and infiltrate the runoff on site. You'll note there is a swimming pool proposed in the back right corner of the house. And that's really, there is some grading associated with that pool, but really that's the extent of the grading for the most part, with the exception of that and the driveway being raised up. We're maintaining the existing grades pretty well. What else? We don't anticipate any ledge removal. That's because the basement elevation is going to be the same as existing, and it's in the same general location. And the utilities will be reconnected. It's serviced by municipal sewer, water, gas, and underground electric. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I would like to, before we begin the questions, let me ask Mr. and Mrs. Bowman, was there something that you'd like to say? You don't have to, but you certainly have the right to.
Can you hear us now?
We can.
Oh, great. Well, just wanted to thank everybody for their time. We really appreciate it. And just wanted to express how excited Tina and I are to move into Linden. We are currently renting in Cohasset right now. We have 2 young boys, ages 6 and 4, and we just love the town of Cohasset, and we love Linden. And we're looking, with this project, we work closely with our architect and engineer to really make sure that the house, would fit into the neighborhood and enhance the neighborhood and really represent both Cohasset and the neighborhood. And we feel we're able to do that, and we look forward to getting started.
Great, thank you very much. With that, then, unless there's any other comments from the applicants, we can turn to the planning board members, and we'll do it in alphabetical order, starting with Clark Brewer.
I don't have any significant comments other than I think the architect did a good job showing the relationship of the proposed structure and the elements with its context and in particular the abutters. The only weak part probably is the landscape, but as was noted, currently the landscape is it's just grass. So the several moves or plantings that are noted on the site plan seem to be improvements for that. In particular, the screening element on the right-hand side. So I think as an architect, I'd say it's a pretty good design. It looks like it's a major upgrade from what was there. And I don't have any downside or negative comments. It seems like the height, the zoning issues have been very clearly shown in the documents.
Great,
Thank
thank you. Tom Callahan? Tom, are you frozen? No, sorry.
Well, this looked like I was frozen for a minute. Can we get this? Leave it on the screen, I guess. But I have a site plan and some of the data that's provided in it. Let's first talk about, just looking at this plan, it looks like this house and everything around it is covering more than the lot than is represented here. But you, on the plan, you say the building coverage is 17.2%. Even earlier, the architect gave, I calculate 19.5, just barely under the zoning limit. But how was that calculated? Does that include the porches and does it include the shed?
We typically do include porches, anything covered by a roof, so the shed as well.
Are you certifying that that's the case here? Because and building coverage, I'm capped with 19.5%. And if it's close, I'd like to know where.
Tom, could you turn off your video so that we can hear you?
So
Sorry.
I'd like that to be clarified. The second thing is the overall coverage of impervious materials. What's the percentage of that? It's not shown and under the zoning data at all. And you have a big pool area. I assume a paved patio, paved walk, paved driveway. Drive in the front of the house. Just the visual makes it look like it's more than 30%. And that data isn't shown at all on the site plan. So I would like to know what that is for the overall coverage. My next comment is about the height. You put here that it's less than 35 feet. Well, how much less? less than 35 feet is just the magic number to comply with zoning, but what is the actual height of the building? Because it's certainly taller than what's there. A few is taller than what's there.
The height of the building is 27 feet, 6 3/4 inches. And that's per Cohasset zoning from mean to mean. So from mean grade to average.
You know, how did you determine mean grade? Because we had a discussion about it last week. It's suddenly become an issue of how it's being calculated.
The mean grade was provided to us by Morse Engineering.
Okay, and how was it calculated? How many points of reference were done?
I believe in this case, we took 4 points, front, back, and either side. But I did do I looked at that a while back for Michael during the early stages of this design.
Do you have any drawing or anything, any data that shows us where you made those measurements?
I certainly can provide that, yes.
My last question is, what other permits do you need or have you obtained so far?
We have been in front of the Conservation Commission, and they did issue a stormwater permit for the project.
And that's why you're doing that little retention basin in the back?
That's correct.
Okay, that's all I have. It's just I would like to see the site plan, you know, revised with, well, at least tell me where I'm wrong in my math on the calculation of building coverage, and I'd like to see the calculation for the entire impervious coverage. Just to be sure that we don't need zoning relief here. It certainly looks like it's more than 30% visually, so I would just like to know that. And I'd like to see the data on how you calculated height.
Thank you very much, Mr. Callahan. Paul Caleri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's a great design and appreciate the fact that it seemingly is well under the height restriction. And I think it's well balanced to the existing home that was there. And yeah, I appreciate the fact that there's that 2 catch basins out in the front and a big, Jeff, do you call it redistribution chambers?
Yeah, subsurface recharge system.
Yeah, I think that's great design to capture the water. So it doesn't affect the neighbors in any way. And I think it's a well-designed house. That's all I have.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Grady?
I don't have much to say about it. I think it's a very nice improvement over the current structure. I think it'll be a nice addition to that area. I would second Tom only on the impervious spaces, just to see how you get your calculations and how much actual impervious spaces are going to be taking up. I'm sorry. Impervious area with the pool, the patio, and things like that. But other than that, I think it's a really nice addition in the neighborhood, and it's a nice property. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Mr. Potter?
I think it's a beautiful house. I think it looks great. I think it will fit in wonderfully with the Linden neighborhood. The design looks excellent. I do see where Tom's coming from on a few of his points, and I think that especially it's something for us to talk about as a planning board, maybe on a separate topic. But with regards to this home, looks like the applicant's been thoroughly compliant with the application guidelines for a large home review. And I think it'll be a nice project for the neighborhood and for the town.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. So my comments are about actually the site plan map. It shows the contours as being 90 to 100 feet. But if you use USGS data, or if you use LiDAR data, it's half of that. So it would be important for you to clarify the derivation of your map so that it reflects the actual elevation. And I'm perfectly willing to say I could be wrong, but I think that I also could be right. And we're working hard on trying to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, the LiDAR mapping is on the NAVD 88 datum, which we do put our projects on if they're in a floodplain because it's critical to where the limit of the flood zone is. In this case, not being in a flood zone, we're on an assumed datum.
Well, we appreciate that. But if your contours do not reflect the elevation and they're on your map, I'm just asking if you would please check them.
Yeah, they are correct. They're in relation to an assumed datum, meaning we picked a point and called it 100. They're not in relation to mean sea level.
All right. So
So going back to the impervious coverage, the intent here is to have the front semicircle driveway to be pervious pavers, and the patio around the pool also to be pervious pavers. So the impervious areas are all of the roof areas, the paved driveway on the left-hand side, and the pool, and that comes to 29.8%. So just under the 30.
Well, with all due respect, both that and the building coverage are too close for comfort. I'd like to see the data.
Yeah, we can certainly update the site plan to include those numbers. Absolutely.
all right, great. Thanks very much. So are there any other comments to be made by the planning board members? If not, let me ask for any comments that have been made by the abutters or other citizens of Cohasset. Lauren, Lind?
There's currently no comments in the question and answer. If there are any attendees listening at this time, if you have any comments and you haven't made them yet, if you could please insert your name and address into the question and chat function. Thank you.
I'll just give them a second to put something in if they're interested. All right, so it appears that there's a request on the part of one of the planning board members to have actual visual confirmation of a set of characteristics of the site. So with that as a proviso, are we in a position to make a recommendation at this time? And if so, would somebody please make a recommendation recognizing that we would be essentially adding a condition before the recommendation is acted on?
Madam Chair?
I would make a motion that we continue the hearing until.
No, I wouldn't do that.
No, I wouldn't do that either.
I wouldn't do, that's not necessary.
Wait, we do this in order, all right? So
Competent speak in order.
let's begin. Clark Brewer?
I think it's fine to approve with conditions as allowed by our large home review bylaw. And those conditions would be based on Tom's comments to revise the site plan to show what's pervious and not pervious, and a detailed tabulation of the building coverage and pervious material coverage totals that need to be under 20 and 30% respectively. But that's not a motion. That's what I think. So.
Mr. Callahan?
Well, that's fine as long, but what if we find that they're over and need zoning relief, we just have to be able to deal with that. And I'd also like to see the height calculations and where the points were that were taken. For the measurement.
All right, thank you. Paul Cleary?
I was also thinking that we could possibly vote to approve the project so long as Jeff Hassick and Mike, the architect, provide the requested documentation. I just feel like it would be unfair to the family that has put forth a good project. And the engineer has spoken to the fact that they're within the tolerance, and as long as that's provided, they can move forward, you know, say by the end of the week. I mean, I just think it would just be a matter of a day or two for the two of the architect and the engineer to put the requested documentation together, so they don't have to wait for another month's time or something to get back on our agenda, which is very busy. That would be my suggestion, that we could approve with, like Clark said, that minor condition, and if those are met and checked off and fall within the allowable thresholds, then best of luck to the family in their new home.
All right, thank you very much, Paul Grady.
I would vote to approve, pending the conditions are met at Tom's request.
All right, thank you, Eric Potter.
Well thought, put
I
together.
vote to approve pending Tom's conditions as well.
Thank you, Amy Glassmeyer. I would like to just make a comment to Mr. Hassett, which is, could you tell me how it was that you decided to use 4 points to determine the elevation?
No, it's a tough question, and it comes up in a lot of the towns around where you're calculating the height from an average grade. And I don't know of any town that really defines how, gives you guidance on how to calculate that. So I do take it case by case, and I try to come up with a reasonable average. In this case, four sides worked.
Right. Okay, so I just want to make a comment that in general, that's not a practice that is a uniform practice within Cohasset, and a small number of points is something that the precedent is more points than that.
Several points.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, a LiDAR and an analysis of the USGS would, of course, clear all of that up.
Yeah, we have a number of survey shots all around the building, and I can provide a calculation that has more than just the 4 shots. That should be fine.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. With that, can I get a motion from one of the members?
Take a
Tom, why don't
motion
you
to
do the
approve.
motion? The motion
Go
to
ahead,
approve
Clark.
any conditions?
All right. Can I have a second?
Second, Eric Potter.
Thank you. All in favor? Please state your name and your vote. Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Nay,
Paul Grady,
Paul Grady, aye.
Paul Caleri,
Paul Cleary, aye.
Eric Potter,
Eric Potter, aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Thank you very much. And let's move on to our next item of business.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone,
Good luck.
so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Amy, point of order. Paul Caleri's our associate member, and we have a full board. So there's no requirement to have him vote.
I understand that, but in the past, when I was the alternate, I voted even though we had a full board. So is that, I am happy to maintain the provision you're describing.
Well, if there's a member missing, I think that it totally makes sense. But generally, for these kinds of public hearing applications, I think you'd just have the 5 regular members vote unless one's missing.
All right, thank you for that information. So now we're going to move into the beginnings of a discussion about the large house review, and it goes into a range of issues that are sort of surround the large house review. So there isn't any constraints at this point in this discussion. This is just meant to be the beginning of a discussion. of a set of issues that arise that we want to look at and think about carefully. I don't think I need to recite what happened last week or to go over other cases that identify instances where the large house review has had a difficult time. I will say that I think we should actually collect information and use the information to determine whether or not that the mechanism is faulty, and if so, how, rather than, I just think that's the natural thing to do, is to actually use the data that we have access to and to look at it reflectively in terms of how we might modify what we have. I noticed that our building inspector has joined the discussion, and so in deference to his position in town, I will recognize Bob Egan.
Thank you, Amy. I don't know if there's any more I could do to start off the conversation beyond what I sent out was several months ago now about my experience and even some of the other staff experience about the large home review, and how I haven't seen it to be a useful tool. And in some cases it's been disruptive, and has led to some animosity, say that didn't need to be. I think this one that came through was very good, a great plan, a great design, and it was well accepted. But I'm not sure that it was designed well and well planned and well accepted just to meet the criteria of a large home review. I think it was done to meet the requirements of zoning that we already have in place, and that they seem to adhere to that. They seem to be aware of it. And they use that, and that seems to me to be enough of a restriction or a requirement without having to have a public hearing and with the time, effort, and money that goes into it. Again, this was a nice one, and I don't know if any of the neighbors even tuned in, or I don't even know if the architect and the owners approached the other neighbors ahead of time, which is what a good prospective buyer, prospective owner, prospective builder typically does. But the fact that it went smoothly is kind of another reason for, why not let zoning control design, and let zoning control mass, and let zoning control other instances, instead of having to have this exercise. So that's pretty much what I said before, and I'd like to carry on the discussion from there.
Thank you. Would anybody like to begin? Eric Potter?
I'm going to raise my hand first because I think by answering maybe my questions, it could move things, the whole entire discussion along. I've been on the planning board for about 5 years now, I believe. Time flies. And I was on when the old large home review bylaw was here, and now with the new large home bylaw review. And I have to say, I've given this a lot of thought, especially knowing that this was going to come on board here. And I tend to agree with Bob. I do have a little bit of a conflict here. If a homeowner is compliant with zoning, why all these extra steps that it cause delays, cause potential conflicts with neighbors, cause potential expenses that they wouldn't otherwise have to incur? If they're in compliance with zoning, why is there essentially a design review of a potential citizen's private property development rights on their own land. So I would ask the question, what's the purpose of the large home review? Is it to inform citizens or to be a restrictive board, a restrictive process that's going to, where that we're going to be giving our opinions on what can and cannot be built. And I'm open to just going in the other direction and being convinced otherwise, because I think there are likely reasons for a large home review, but I do think that it does create more dissension between neighbors than if a neighbor just knew that the property was in compliance with zoning. They probably wouldn't even, start squabbling with one another over what sort of shading and landscaping is going in, and kind of nonsensical stuff that winds up creating conflict. So I think that's where I stand, and I think it's become more apparent to me that the present bylaw, at a very minimum, should be revisited to some degree, because I think you either go in one or two directions, and maybe think about getting rid of a large home review altogether, or getting on the same page with a large home review that makes sense and actually goes in the direction where it's headed, where this is a review that allows us to have more teeth and a little bit more power to enforce for situations that just arose. I also think that the bigger issue here is I thank Tom and Amy for the issues that you just rose at the last large home review. And maybe that's why I also have a problem with it, because the issues that you both rose at the last one, and even at the one at the last meeting, were quite simply not ones that I would have discovered on my own. And I'm relying upon the people that are the specialists in the field, the engineers, the architects, that are stamping these plans. So it puts a lot more responsibility on the planning board to be, if we're also be an investigative board of some kind, or a fact-checking board of some kind, because I'll readily admit I don't know that I have the qualifications to start wondering whether or not FAR has been complied with, or what is the proper building height. So I think instead of coming down on an individual applicant and wasting our own neighbors' time and money on a large home review, I think our efforts would be much better used, not with an individual large home review, but in kind of tightening up what seemed to me a lot of loose ends and loose definitions on the zoning end of things, with regards to calculations and how these properties are built. That's it.
Great, thanks very much. Anyone, Tom Callahan?
All right, strap in for a long comment. As I've said before, Clark and I back in the day were the authors of this bylaw. It was designed to deal with mansionization, which was becoming something in the 90s and the early 2000s that more towns were being concerned about. It was originally proposed to be a special permit process. Wasn't done. I'm not even sure even today, since I don't know that any town has done it as a special permit, it would be legal, because there's zoning as of right, and then there's special permits, and they're somewhat separate. But what happened with 580 pointed out, well, the problem with ever having to deal with after the fact permitting. And then it did, like Eric just said, it dealt with definitions, problems with calculations. Tonight I raised compliance with the zoning bylaw. I mean, that's not a large home issue. That's an any project issue. And checking these calculations, particularly when they are so close to the limits, is not something that should be screened at the staff level when it's filed. But those are separate issues. That's not large. The issue with large home is, do we want to regulate the size of houses in this town? And if yes, how do we best do that? And I am working on changes to the table of area regulations, and I will agree with Bob. That's where it should come. And then the third question, does this large home review process as written accomplish anything or accomplish any goals? Now, I wanted to vote no on the substance of the project tonight, no matter what. I think it's out of scale. I think it's too big, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, we made large home a site plan review process, and the criteria is it it's harmonious with the neighborhood or is not harmful, injurious, or objectionable? Well, frankly, that gives me absolutely nothing to base denial on. Is it injurious? No, I don't think it's injurious. Is it objectionable? Yes. Is it harmful? No. Is it harmonious? No. But I know as a lawyer that none of that would stand up in court. So, as I said a couple of weeks ago, I'm at the point after this, and particularly seeing, you know, how these hearings have gone for, you know, on the occasions I've had to see them, and now participating in one tonight. I unfortunately think it's now a useless exercise, and it is not the way to go about the objective of regulating the size and bulk of houses. And I'd much rather focus my energies you know, through the zoning working group, and with this board and the zoning board is working on changes to the dimensional requirements in our bylaw, the table of area regulations. And I've thrown out an idea and keep refining it. We're going to work on it in the zoning working group as a more longer term, not something for this town meeting. But I think this is not worth the paper it's written on, because if we wanted to say no, there is nothing in here which gives us any legal grounds to say no. It's not a permit. If it is a site plan review, it is a discussion. And to the extent it is creating hostility with neighbors, that's fine. You know, my comments on tonight's project and things in last week, yes, it's giving me a forum to question other things about compliance with the zoning bylaw, but that's not the purpose of large home review. And that compliance with the zoning bylaw either comes through other permitting processes or it comes through the initial screening in town hall. So, you know, unless we made it stronger or made it something else that it's not today, and again, I'm not even sure the legality of doing that, I would propose that we, at this coming town meeting, move to delete it. And then in working in the table of area regulations and the reform of those, we can deal with things like footprint size, bringing in FAR, all other kinds of things that are defensible and legal for us to do to limit the size of large homes. Again, assuming on the threshold question, do we want to limit the size of large homes? 15 years ago we did, and that's why this was created. It doesn't seem to have stopped the size of building in town at all. And we still have, you know, so we first have to decide if that's a value we still care about. I do, but maybe others don't. So, but this thing is just not workable for you know, it's nothing. So I say we get rid of it.
All right, Paul Grady.
Well, I disagree. You know, while you give you all the credit, you and Clark, for writing that and putting it in, I think that some of the things that have happened, 580, are basically post-child's for a large home review. If something passes, so for instance, and I may be wrong on some points, but it's impression, and they pass with, say, what, 4,000 square feet, then all of a sudden we turn around, the boards are up, the foundation's laid, and the house is halfway up, and it turns out to be 5,200 square feet. What then? So personally, I think it's a policing issue. And secondly, I think that the large home review should have some more teeth added to it. And I'm not for any more detail and long meetings than anybody else. But I've seen a lot of big homes go up here, and I've seen a couple of things go on that shouldn't have happened, in my view, or in the view of many others, and it's been allowed to happen. So I think a stopgap is necessary. So I am for the large home review, you know, if it's presented, and if there should be consequences if what's approved is not followed up or is not adhered to. I'm sorry. And Eric, you said something very interesting. Neighbors. You know, having had something like those things, you know, come close to me. Neighbors. When 580 went up, the neighbors were talking about it. Be it shade, be it a change in what they thought was going to happen. So I think it's kind of our job to try to protect that and to protect the integrity of the town. And while I welcome building, and someone should have the right to do what they want within the legal guidelines of their property, I have no question about that whatsoever. I do question when they go up and over that. That's what happens. And that's my case. Tom, I see your hand. And
No, we're going to go in order and then we'll go back around again. So
I'm a firm believer in the large home review, because there's been too many things that have happened, and it's just to erase it and then leave it. I think you're saying to the zoning board, well, I think that could be a recipe for disaster. If you have more stopgaps, the better, and may teach people compliance, may protect those neighbors. And that's where I'd run with it. So I would vote to keep the large home review, and if possible, add teeth to it.
all right, thank you, Clark Brewer.
Thank you, Amy. You know, I hear everybody's comments about large home review, and you know, maybe there's some frustration with it. It's not a perfect bylaw by any stretch, but I think it perfectly strikes a balance between of the intended goal originally, which is I think Cohasset as a kind of subculture is concerned about and perhaps even afraid of change in our neighborhoods, in our town. And the main goal of this from 2004 to when we changed it in 2018 was basically to illuminate to neighbors what was happening in their neighborhood, so they could see it before you know, the framing was done and the trim was all on. They could see what does their neighbor want to do. It's basically a neighborhood PR move on the part of the zoning bylaw to have this in place so that everybody can know what's going on, because people, they might want to fight about it, but that's not the intention of the bylaws, to open up a vehicle for fighting among neighbors. I mean, some are going to do it anyway, but generally speaking, it's a PR move that I think uses information to kind of combat the fear of the unknown and fear of change. So I think as amended, it works well, and I think that the lot coverage and the building coverage aspects of zoning being 20% are a perfect way to regulate house size. I mean, I think that does the job. But this is just a forum where we get to see what's going to happen ahead of time and see if are there any neighbors that are overly concerned or about particular issues. And sometimes there are design conflicts, and I always bring up the spotlight from the garage into the neighbor's bedroom. But there are opportunities for screening that can make a big difference for you know, a change to a neighborhood. So I'll say it again. I think this bylaw strikes the balance that it needs to, using information to combat fear of the unknown and fear of change.
Thank you very much, Clark. Paul Colery.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that I agree with a few of the previous board members in that our zoning that's in place kind of does a good job putting up the guardrails for builders. So I don't think that this large home review is necessary for us as the planning board. And I would vote with the others to do away with it. There was something else that I wanted to, I don't think that we should keep going back to 580 Jerusalem as comments, because there was clearly lots of problems, misrepresentation, lots of things that we all know and we worked through over the past couple of months. But I don't think that that's the example. It's unfortunate timing, obviously, but like, had that not happened, I think that this conversation might have been a little bit different. So I guess I've expressed how I feel, and that's all I have for comments.
So I'll weigh in. Thanks, Paul. I think town is facing new challenges that are different than the past. And the large house review is probably was in some ways rather prescient in realizing what was going to happen. Right now in town, there are 5 houses that have just turned over for over $1.5 million, one for $3 million, and they're going to be tear downs. And if you look around what's happening, and we are in some cases approving projects, we're starting to look more like an enclave than we are looking like a town of neighborhoods. And I think that there are people that live in town who really like their neighborhoods and they like the feeling of neighborhoods. And other towns, such as, I'm not going to quote Wellesley, but I'll say Brookline has an interesting policy about composition and integrity and fitting into neighborhoods rather than having drastic transformations taking place one by one. I can tell you that there's no empirical evidence that goes 100% in one direction or the other about what happens when you start to have houses which are really drastically different in size. In some cases, the actual value of the house falls, the small house waiting to be sold. And in other cases, there's a premium that lot is paid for that the individual benefits from. But there is no absolute statement that says, or no research that shows that the people whose houses are of much smaller size or of smaller size actually benefit, and they may actually not benefit. So I think, we can't think about it from the standpoint of necessarily a return. And I think that's important for us to think about. I think that I guess I can't leave 580. And the reason I can't leave 580 is it's not the only example of large house reviews that have been a mess up. And my experience has been that we've done a large house review maybe once every 3 months. And out of those, there have been probably 3 or 4 that have really been doozies. And they've been doozies because there's got to be three possible explanations. We messed up, somebody tried to hoodwink us, or there was a mess up on the part of the side of the developer. But that it's our responsibility to actually make sure that what we're being told is measured and that it is in alignment with what the town policies are. And I think the public feels that way too. So my feeling is that if we were to eliminate the large house review, I don't think, if you talk to Woody talks about the fact that even with the zoning as it is, that there are gaps and leakages that would not necessarily retain the quality of a neighborhood. That's not what the zoning ordinance is designed to do. And so to me, the large house review is a statement about the kind of community that Cohasset wants to be. And so for me personally, I would be much more interested in revising the policy to get closer to effect than I would abandoning it. I think it's also important that we have features of our existing policies that are very problematic. People are mounding up dirt and having walkout basements. So they're getting 4 stories. And, you know, you're getting attics that they say they're not going to occupy, but we know they are. So if they're paying $1 million or $3 million for a lot, and they're going to tear a house down and put something back up again, they've got to match that land value with a structure value if they're going to be able to be successful in the marketplace. So for me, I would prefer to explore a mechanism that is more effective in the sorts of, in resolving and eliminating the kinds of problems we have. Now, it is important to realize that some of the most egregious cases are a failure of implementation of the existing policy. I think that's important to say because there's a tendency sometimes when things don't work right to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I would argue that I've seen, it feels to me as if there have been errors in the application of the existing policy. So we can't say, unless we look at what's happened, looking through the assessor's database and seeing what's happened in town, to really know exactly whether or not the large house review failed or not. And if it did fail to achieve its full objectives, we have to ask the second question, which is why did that happen? If our zoning laws are sufficient, they should have caught what doesn't get caught by the large house review, or we accidentally approve something we shouldn't. That's what you're saying, that our zoning laws are sufficient to protect us from people doing things that we would prefer they not do based on the existing rules, and yet it happens. So my view is that I'd rather see us work on something that would be a really good regulation and maintain some sense of neighborhoods than to eliminate it and then just assume that zoning is going to be able to cure whatever the ills are. Okay, so we'll go around again. Tom?
I want to be clear that I would like something with teeth to regulate the size of houses in this community so they don't get out of scale. You know, it may be that the horse is out of the barn, but this was once a town that had a working class, a middle class, and an upper class. I'm not so sure we have those 3 classes anymore. Maybe it's too late, but, and I'm always sitting there looking at bylaws, writing bylaws, and, Karis the other day circulated Wellesley's rules and regulations, which I don't want to go too fast in the past, but we should have had 15 years ago and we never did. But be that as it may, looking at this as a lawyer who has done cases and appeals of town board decisions, a bylaw should have some objective and it should have some enforceability. And I'd ask anybody who's supporting this bylaw, A, has it ever stopped a large house? And how can you stop a large house under the way it's written? That's my point. It's useless as written because it has no teeth. And we're not there to be the cheerleaders for a project we were tonight. And we're not there to make the neighbors feel good and give them exposure to what might be there. That's not our job. The job of a bylaw is to either permit something or not permit something. And here we cannot not permit something and have never not permitted something. So all in favor of making something where we can do that, but this isn't the vehicle. That's all I'm saying. And I would love to hear an example of if you were like me tonight and you thought this house was too objectionable for the neighborhood, how you would have said no to this project tonight and make it stick. You couldn't. I couldn't. You couldn't do it to 580.
Well, I don't think you can use 580 as an example. That
No,
was an explicit error. That was a conscious error.
Yeah, but all said and done, when 580, all said and done about all of its procedural problems and deceptions and everything, we still were faced at the end, which we might have been, if everything went right, we would have faced with this decision in October of 2019. But we were faced with the decision, is this house okay from a large home review under the criteria that's in that bylaw point of view? We had absolutely no basis to say no to that project. If there
Okay,
was no
so-
zoning violation, there were no zoning bylaw violations. What if a bunch of neighbors came to a project and did oppose it and were dead set against it? How are we supposed to say no to a large home under that bylaw? That's my problem.
Okay,
I would
so let me
Never
clarify.
write a bylaw that does it.
Let me clarify what you're saying then. You want a policy that achieves the objective.
I don't want a
Of-
policy, I want a bylaw.
Okay, you want a bylaw that achieves the objective of a house fitting into a context.
Correct.
And that's
And
a very
you
general
are-
way of saying it.
You are correct that that needs to be done within the context of the zoning bylaw. And Woody is correct that our current zoning bylaw is full of holes for that. And that is why Woody and I and people in the zoning working group are going to look at the table of area regulations and suggest changes for it that can achieve these objectives and fill in these holes. This bylaw just doesn't do it, that's all.
Right, Paul Grady?
Okay, so Tom, my question to you is, while this bylaw, flawed as you may think it is still on the table, you would vote to abolish it. So there's nothing out there until you and Woody come up with a new law. So we just get rid of this large home review, take away that mechanism, even though it's flawed, or work on that bylaw.
Fine, I would keep it then.
Why wouldn't you use, could I just know, since we're in a planning board meeting, why don't I'll ask you, why don't you use your expertise to beef it up? So it does have a couple layers. So you're not seeing the McMansions that you talk about, or we talk about, or people coming up. People are entitled to build what they want, but to abolish something and do away with it before you have another mechanism in place is foolish. So if you bear with me for a moment. So I don't see why you wouldn't try to beef this law using your legal expertise, the bylaw, beef it up, and then work to tighten up the zoning restrictions because you're on so many boards. The board with Woody and doing all those things.
I'll answer that because, again, it was originally written to be a special permit process, which would have teeth because there's a definable standard by which a board can say no. However, at the time, people objected it to it being a special permit. It wasn't clear in 2005 whether it could be a special permit, whether that would be legal because of what is allowed as of right under our bylaw. And it's not clear today that's the method.
All right, so I'm going to.
I will gladly rewrite it as a special permit process and ask Karis to give us a formal definitive legal opinion because we never had one.
Or Dorenzis if he's still around. Or-
Whoever, I don't care. I mean,
So why don't we just start beefing that up? I think a lot's changed since 2005, if I'm not mistaken. Having been here since 2002, I've seen a lot change. Not
yes,
all.
I-
Some,
But the dynamic of state zoning law and what you have in a bylaw. I mean, we do have plenty of uses and that are special permit things, but this is the size of the house. And I believe that legally, all of our choice is to either put in a hard limit, like footprint, lot coverage that Bob has talked about, or going to FAR. Put in a hard limit, and that's the limit. And if you go over that limit, it's a variance. I'm just telling you as a lawyer that I think when you're working with zoning bylaws, there's only so much we can do.
I don't disagree with you at all. I don't disagree with everything you said. I applaud your legal expertise. I'm saying, why don't you take that and apply it to what we currently have before abolishing a mechanism and leaving a flawed one in its place?
I will gladly do that.
Well,
Go to town hall.
timing wise, we're not in a position to do more than the investigation, but we do have the time to actually come up with an answer. Clark, do you have more to say?
Well, I mean, the bylaw was passed by town meeting. I mean, not by the planning board. I mean, it's a town meeting vote. People stand up and advocate for zoning that solves problems, and it's a 2/3 majority. It's not a simple standard to get it, to have gotten it passed to begin with, and to have made the changes subsequently. And I'll say again, I think it does. The bylaw, one thing I didn't say before is that by having this in place, I think the applicant generally tries to do a better job on their documentation than they would if the bylaw wasn't in place, because they want a quick approval or approval with conditions so they can go on with their project. And I think that allows them to think about certain things that might be issues for their neighbors, in terms of lighting, massing, shade, and harmonious vegetation. So I don't think, I mean, Tom seems to be advocating for if it's got no teeth, then it doesn't matter. It's of no consequence, and we should be limiting large homes. The goal is to limit what people can do with their property.
Yes.
And you know, the trend has been larger and larger. And I don't know if we, the town of Cohasset, can fight that if that's the cultural trend. With that said, I still think that this bylaw does something as a PR and neighborhood fear fighting with information purpose.
Could I jump in?
Sure, Bob.
Yeah, just going back a few things, as things were being said, I, thought of things at the time, and now I'm trying to put them all together. But as Clark said, and I think, Tom, they was around at the beginning also, that for a while this was strictly informational, and the concept was that, yeah, the people in the neighborhood deserve to know what's going to happen.
Bob, you'll need to take your camera off in order to get a good signal from you, voice-wise.
And okay, I'll go do that.
There, that's better.
Okay, I hope that's better.
That's better.
Okay, and if I have to repeat it, that people would in the neighborhood would be curious and have a right to know what's going on when that little ranch house gets sold, or when the vacant lot that now has a sewer connection gets sold. So it was an almost a show and tell, and it was introduced that way by the planning board, and the neighbors asked questions, and at the end of the night, and they were usually only one night, the planning board would make its recommendations and explain that they were limited by zoning. As far as, do people need to have a public hearing now for a house in the neighborhood? Well, we've come a few steps into the information age where people call me, not just about a big house next door, but they may call about the neighbor putting on an addition, or the neighbor putting up a shed, or the neighbor putting up a swimming pool. And those questions get answered, and I explain to them, these are the rules, and the neighbor seems to be, and the neighbor is abiding by the rules. They're accepting of that. And if you tell somebody that there's going to be a big house being built next door, but it meets all the zoning requirements, they accept that. They wish it didn't happen. He is complying with the bylaw in place. I don't think they really feel that the need to be involved, but when they are invited, now they feel that they have, that they do have some involvement and they do have some say and they do have, hopefully in their minds, hopefully the ability to change it. And they are is almost as disappointed. Well, some of them do go away disappointed with, shaking their heads and, what was that all about? Because it was, nothing changed. Not, is there a reason for somebody to change it? They follow the bylaw. And another thing I'll point out, that we're one of the few towns that I know of that has lot coverage, and 20% seems to be a reasonable number. And up until 2003, it was 30%. And the 30% encompassed every impervious surface. And it was only in 2003 that we broke it out and broke it down so that there'd be 20 and 10 rather than the total of 30. And I think that in itself is enough of a restriction to come up with reasonably sized homes on a lot. 80% of the lot is left unbuilt on. I don't know how much more you could ask of people. Okay.
Other board members? Eric?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I understand that it's probably unlikely that you get rid of a bylaw in this day and age where there's more and more governance over people's private property rights. So if that's the case, then I do think that the present bylaw needs just to be revisited. And I think the process by which we apply review of the current bylaw until the present bylaw is dealt with is even more importantly needs to be dealt with. I don't think it's fair that if someone that has complied with all of the requirements of the large home review in their application doesn't get a decision that night at a planning board meeting, and that decision can be made with conditions as this one was tonight, so that there is compliance with zoning and with any concerns that the planning board may have with a application that's been compliant with all the requirements of the applicant. And I think that's where some of my frustration really comes from. Number one, I don't think it's just fair to a homeowner to drag them along with regards to a bylaw that really doesn't allow us to all out deny them anyway. So if I were in that seat, I'd be very frustrated and upset if it took a month or two for my large home to get approved. So until we decide what to do with this present bylaw, I think we have to have a serious conversation on how the present one is applied. And I think there's dissenting views on the planning board as to how we go about, reviewing these, dealing with these large home reviews, which there's no uniformity from a board perspective, at least from my perspective, on what we can and cannot do, and whether or not we should be, scrutinizing various different aspects of a project as a board member.
So I'd like to say something, and then Tom. I think that the very first thing that we ought to do is tighten up what we expect the applicants to provide and be extremely meticulous about it. The examples that I've been a part of to see where there have been problems are a function of faulty materials provided by applicants. So if we control both the order of activities as well as the content of activities, and at the very least, what we should do is have a system that is 100% consistent, that is acknowledged by all the boards that it could touch and be influenced by, so that before we make anything, that is a drastic change, that we change the practice that we currently experience. Because the most complex cases that I've been involved in were instances where we had insufficient or virtually incorrect documentation. And we, there are standards that we can set without having to revise the bylaw so that everybody behaves the same way. Then we can step back and say, we're looking at a uniform bylaw and it still has these problems. But for the very first set of steps forward, we need to have more coordination across the boards and much better, much more precise and much more accountable information. Paul Grady and then Tom Callahan.
I'd like to say something about that. Eric brought up something sometime, this a year or two at the meeting, and Clark as chair enforced that. And I think that's worked pretty well, Amy. These people came up before us tonight with well thought out, laid out plans. Clark did lay that out, and you were at that meeting as well, that people come before the board, so we're not throwing off as many decisions or putting it off for another month or 2 months and slowing the process up. So that's kind of inherent on the people themselves. So they should know what they're coming into when they're coming to a large home review. Again, I give Clark credit for that. That already went out because there was some frustration. People coming in late, I'd like to present these plans. No, that's not happening.
Well, I mean, tonight we saw an instance where there was variability in the information. So if we can come up with something that's consistent and consistently applied and consistently checked, at least we eliminate our own responsibility for placing a constraint where it shouldn't occur.
I think you're adding on to it because Clark did that already. So they do, to a degree, know what to come up in front of us with. But I would say in tonight's discussion, whether people want to get rid of it or not, my suggestion would be that Tom, maybe work within the boards and add Keith to add some. I'm sorry?
Forget about getting rid of it. I'm going to reform it rather than get rid of it.
So that's what I'm for, is adding some teeth to the bloody law. And again, Paul has said, let's not go back to 580. Well, let's go back to 580. Should have happened. There's a couple of things that shouldn't have happened, not just there. So that is, and then we'll leave 580 alone after that. It's already done. But if Tom's adding some teeth, I just think it'd be a shame to get rid of something before you have something in place. And I do agree with Clark that it does give the impetus for the builder or the new owner to really kind of cross their T's and dot their I's before they add that new wing on, or that new back room, or that new garage, or that attic space.
So Tom Callahan and
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. Eric brought up some good points, and I'm not here to bust people's chops and make them come back to meeting after meeting. But I am perhaps take a more devil's advocate point of view of making people jump through the hoops they have to jump through under a bylaw. But the conditions I wanted tonight is because the site plan jumped out to me that there may be problems with compliance with the zoning bylaw with regards to building coverage, impervious coverage, and height. And, the engineer admitted that he's within, half a percentage, 6 feet or so, of building coverage and, within 0.3% of the limit on lot coverage. And we're taking his word for it. The height seems to be an 8 feet difference, but that's based on the measuring points. Who knows what it'll end up being? But the point, this bylaw doesn't even talk about zoning compliance. It's just that, we have this forum and I notice it. And I think as a planning board member, if I see that there might be a problem with compliance with the zoning bylaw, I should bring it up. But it's not even a condition, a criteria of this large home review. And my question to everybody is, okay, so let's say on Friday, we find that the calculations are wrong, or perhaps we would have had them reviewed by somebody on our side and we find they're wrong. What do we do about it? What do we do about it? Withdraw our approval of large home review? Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. That's my point. So I'm, again, working on the reform of it, but if somebody can answer what happens on Friday if the calculations are wrong and shows he needs a variance, what do we do?
Just a question. Wouldn't that go back to the building inspector? Forgive me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, we shouldn't actually be reviewing zoning compliance. You shouldn't have to bring up that, you're.
Yeah, but I can't ignore it if I see it. And it jumps out.
Something percentage. you know, and the height thing with 580, we should have even had to deal with it. In the past, if we saw something that looked like it was a zoning issue, we said, come back when you've gone to the zoning board of appeals.
Yeah, but we didn't do that tonight. That's my point. I can't ignore it if I see it.
So this is why I feel like we have to have a completely documented and checked body of information in order to know what to do. If there are ways for them to come to us with the information that we didn't have tonight.
And there was ways for Morris Engineering to check and find out from zoning if 4 points are enough. 580 pointed out that that is not how it is done according to the zoning bylaw or the practice of the ZBA. We have to tighten our processes up immediately so that we eliminate the variation that is otherwise going to be issues that would keep us troubling someone else when in fact it's none of our business to do so. So at the very least, making the process consistent, making all boards know at the same time what's happening will give us greater control, but it will also be more respectful of the process and the people involved. Eric?
I don't disagree, Amy, with what you're saying at all. I actually think you're right on point. I just think it's a little bit the wrong forum. I don't think that the planning board, maybe this board is qualified to opine and start giving, in reviewing, you know, how the heights were measured in LiDAR and all that other stuff. But I mean, if you're looking, 20 years, 10 years from now, is there going to be a board, or even 5 years from now, that has people on it that are qualified to be reviewing these things and raising these points on a large home review? And is it the right place for that to be done? Are the people that sit on the board even qualified to do so? And I think the issue, it sounds like, is that there's maybe a bylaw interpretation issue that needs to be tied up. I actually think our processes have been really worked on. I think Lauren and Jen have done a fantastic job at getting some pretty comprehensive applications in front of us now. And I don't know that it's our process that's wrong. I think it's the information that we get that's presented to us that may leave, there may be some ambiguity with regards to what's presented to us. And you can't even necessarily fault the applicant for that, because they're only working off what's provided to them from the town bylaws. And so that's where this all really, that's really the next, where this all starts. And so to tighten or short things up, on our end, when you still have this ambiguous language out there, we're still at the same spot at the end of the day. And if Tom isn't there to ask these questions, you know, I'm certainly not going to be qualified to do so. So is the next board member going to be qualified to do so? And how does that really improve anything, I guess, is the question.
Well, so why wouldn't, so Paul, Grady, and Clark Brewer?
All right, so Clark and Tom had put together this bylaw. So maybe this board is qualified, maybe it isn't. But is it inherent on us as the existing board to try to pass down some of that expertise, to set those guidelines that other boards can follow? Maybe grow on, develop. They may chip away, but they may grow. So isn't it, while we're sitting on this board, on us to maybe pass down some of that expertise that might improve things for
It is on us.
future editions? Again, that's what I said.
On us to do.
Inherent on us as an existing sitting board to pass down what we know and what we're learning tonight, or from 580, again, I'm using it, or from another project that happened, or projects like tonight that go through. But as Tom said, or Amy said, work with the boards to get them through. So we have guidelines. Work with the building inspector so things don't go through, or they go through correctly. Work with the, again, zoning boards. But while we sit here, it's our responsibility. As much as it's our responsibility to pass that expertise and what we've learned down to future boards as they come in. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you, Paul. Clark?
And, you know, like the town of Wellesley has a design review board. And we have a design review board in Cohasset, but there was a very deliberate effort to not have the design review board have any review capability of single family residences. So the chairman of the planning board can take a project, that's, like the harbor project, for example, ask the design review board to kick it around. In general, there've been a bunch of architects and people with a design expertise. If the large home review is sort of like a perfect thing for the planning board to say, hey, design review board, can you tell us if there's anything wrong with this? Then because in some cases the design review board, it's seen like you have to get design review board approval, and that's what they have in Wellesley, and it's like another layer. I'll repeat that I think the large home review bylaw straddles the fence. It does its job in dispelling fear of the unknown. And if some people want to make it tighter, stronger, and other people say it's irrelevant, maybe you're both right. But that doesn't mean it goes away, because again, it's a zoning bylaw. It's up to 2/3 majority of town meeting to change it or get rid of it.
Tom Callahan?
As I've been sitting here, Paul, do you want to go first? Go ahead.
No, go, please. I'm listening to you.
No, it's Paul Caleri.
Paul Cleary.
They both put their hands up at the same time.
Yeah,
Thank you, Tom. So, Madam Chair, do you know that there's the raise your hand function physically? Like you can click a button to raise?
Yeah. Yep, I do. And it seems like it's almost impossible to get anyone to do it. So that's why.
I think we're a board and we're having discussions. It's pretty simple. There's only 6 of us, and like,
I am absolutely happy for that to be the mechanism for it to work.
so I just didn't know also, do you look at the screen in forms of like galleries so you can see like all Hollywood Squares right now, all 9 of us?
Correct.
Yeah. I just think it would be helpful in process, right? We're trying to improve our process here. And for you as the chair, I think it would be, good for people to try to raise their hand and wait until they're identified by the chair to speak, instead of it being kind of, bouncing back and forth. So I think a lot of people said a lot of good things and interesting things. And I was listening to Bob and I was a little bit confused about the 2010 that you had mentioned. Bob, are you still with us?
Yep.
So, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, could I ask Bob a question directly?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So,
Up until 2003 or 4, our lot coverage was limited to 30%, and the 30% was all the impervious surfaces. That's building and hardscape. So somebody could fill up 30% of their lot with house and put in a gravel driveway and space between their brick walks, for example, and build a house that filled up the lot with 30% house and 70% open space. And in 2003, I proposed that we break that down into 20 and 10, and it seemed and it doesn't seem to have hurt anybody. The 20 is still a reasonable, it seems to me, a reasonable number, but at least it eliminated, it reduced the potential size of houses. So that's what it is now.
What is the 10, Bob?
10 is a hardscape. So that would be driveways, swimming pools, tennis courts, whatever. But buildings are 20%.
In your opinion, what is it that, because I'm like I said, I'm learning a lot through this process, right? I feel like the newest member here, Tom, has decades of experience.
I'm old.
And I'm sorry?
I'm old.
You're a little older than I am. You're not old. You're just slightly older than I am. So I'm enjoying and I feel like I'm benefiting greatly from all the knowledge that's in the room on the screen. So, I just, again, I don't know, Bob, what does this large home review cover that isn't covered by the zoning? Because as far, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what happens is you come for a large home review and then you submit your plans to the building department, and the zoning enforcement officer then checks off that you're within the height and checks those other boxes. Is that correct in the process, or am I missing
Yeah,
something?
well, I mean, it could be before or could be before or after. Yeah, I mean, typically, we very seldom get plans submitted that don't adhere to the zoning regulations. That what, you know, an architect, that's the first thing he does when he's designing a house is making sure it fits on the lot. So it's very infrequently, you know, sometimes, you know, an architect who isn't familiar with our bylaw might think that he can put a second floor on a house as long as he doesn't exceed the footprint. And in some towns, he can do that. But in Cohasset, you still have to meet setbacks for the second floor. So that might be a mistake somebody makes. But for the most part, anything that comes forward meets those dimensional requirements. And I'll just, if I could just add one more thing, if the concern is that the houses are too big, I can only say it, to me, the simplest way to control houses getting too big is to do it in the table of area regulations, to have a subjective, you know, process. I don't think is efficient, and I don't think it's fair. I think if somebody if somebody meets their dimensional requirements, and if this board thinks those dimensional requirements should be tightened up, that makes sense. But you know, it's the subjectiveness that I think is a problem.
So I guess lastly, in closing, and I won't say anything else, what was presented to us tonight, and you know, I thought was a pretty good presentation, and Tom asked for clarification on two different points, one being elevation original, and then secondly, height of the building. And for me, I work with a lot of these professionals day in and day out, and I don't know if I should take their word for it. I mean, I think they're all licensed professionals, and that I believe licenses are at stake if they misrepresent to a board like us. And so when the question was presented, what is the elevation and what is the height? I thought they were both answered, and as far as I'm concerned, I like to take people's word for what they tell me. I know that we had a situation, you know, that leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth in the last project that came before us, but I just feel like it was like recognized or asked the question, and the question was answered. And I, you know, so long as it checks out and the answers are correct, then they got our approval, but they still have to go before the zoning enforcement officer to get a building permit. So I'm sorry if I took up a lot of time, but thank you for letting me share.
So for in the future, if everybody would use the hand raise, that would be really both the fairest and also the easiest to keep account of. So
Hey,
Tom,
Amy?
Tom,
Or
John,
not
I
to
have-
Amy or Tom, I don't have to interrupt. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to talk. I just don't. I know it sounds crazy. I can't always find the hand.
Neither can I.
it's over in the right-hand corner when you open up the panel by clicking on participants. When on the bottom bar, if you click participants, it'll open up the participants.
Oh, I see it.
Right? Okay, and
Okay.
see where it says raise hand?
Yes, thank you, guys.
Okay, so just so Tom wanted to be like a brat, he jumped on it quickly. Sorry, Paul Grady. So it's Tom's turn. And then because you tried, Paul, I'm going to let you. And then I think Eric might want to say something.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so Tom and then Paul Grady.
I just wanted to point something out and perhaps ask the chair if we can ask Lauren to do some research for us. I'm sitting here and I looked at the Wellesley Large Home Rules and Regulations and the Wellesley Large Home Bylaw. And Clark, maybe you'll recall when you and I sat down after the 2017 town meeting, I think we looked at it because now, you know, subsection C with the criteria in our bylaw that was added in 2018, it's almost verbatim from Wellesley's. I think that's where we got it. So Wellesley's bylaw and their rules and regulations are long, very wordy. They are very heavy on process and what is to be submitted. The criteria for them to review a project is the same as ours. They mention the word denial, but they don't say how denials actually occur, on what they can base a denial on. So I would like Lauren, if she can, and I may have called them in 2017 and asked them this same question, but I'd like Lauren to talk to the Wellesley town planner and see if, since they have essentially an identical bylaw to ours, is there anything they do in terms of denial or making changes that they want stick that we could perhaps adopt? On paper, they have the same thing, and on paper, I assume they run into the same legal problem I'm bringing up. But if they've got some magic out there that they do, let's find out. So if it's okay to ask Lauren, you know, to add to her many other duties, to just give a shout out to the town planner in Wellesley. I'd love to know how it actually works. And
Okay,
again, I think I had that conversation in 2017, but my notes would be long gone from it.
All right.
You know, just to show what we have, what else is out there. So.
Great. Thank you very much. Paul Grady.
Last thing I'll say about that is listening to Paul a minute ago, that bit of unpleasantness that we are not talking about anymore. Now, shouldn't we use that as a template to make sure that that unpleasantness does not happen again?
Yes.
That's what I'll throw out there. I agree with some of Paul's points, but it was a bit of unpleasantness to use to quote. So we should be using this as a template to see that it does not happen again.
If I can recognize myself, I just think we need to deconstruct what happened, take account of many things happened. It wasn't just a single thing that happened. And it happened from the very beginning at the stormwater permit stage, and it was carried forward because the size of the structure was specified at the moment of the discussion of the stormwater permit. So it was known, the size was known. We know that something like that happened, but there are pieces along the way that failed, right? We went all the way to the end of the meeting without having a site plan signed by the surveyor that did the site plan, just as an example. So I think that you may think I'm being Pollyannish by saying that we need to have an ironclad checklist that everybody goes through exactly in the same way, and all boards have the same information, but it's the only way for us to remove the variance that we create ourselves by having a process that goes, sometimes the stormwater permit first, sometimes it might come to us, maybe it might go to zoning, rather than, and we don't get the information, and as it's going through these processes, we get it when it's finished. We should all get the same information. Everything that is there should be checked off, checked off, so that when it gets to the individual boards, what they're dealing with are real problems and not just errors. It's in the benefit to the applicant to get feedback that there are things wrong with their case before it comes to us, because we just drag the process out. That's what you're saying. So if we tighten the way we do things from the very beginning, and we see it all at the same time, we will be able to have greater control, and we will probably improve the process for the applicant. So 8:21 and we thought we were going to end sooner than now.
I think we've talked it out.
Well, I think the question, if we've talked it out, I mean, I think we have a pretty good idea of what people feel.
Yep.
What is the direction? So you have a directive, Tom, you would like to see somebody talk with the folks at Wellesley. I
Yeah,
personally think we ought to look at Brookline because it's got a really interesting model, which is based around neighborhood integrity. So that's a second one. And then I think what we have to think about is process.
That's, I mean, that was the other thing that was on the agenda, you know, and the email that you sent out and you and me, and that's a separate issue than this. The substance of the bylaw and whether it serves a purpose is a separate issue from our process problems. Our process problems cover any type of permit, not just this one. So let's just keep those a little separate. But is there a reason why we're not discussing that tonight since it was on the agenda?
I think it was just trying not to have an endless meeting, and you know, the staff has 3 meetings a week and it's really quite
Yep, that's
onerous.
fine.
But we are going to have a meeting in which that could potentially be discussed.
Yep.
Okay, so how do we take what we've talked about and put it into some kind of actionable
Statement so we can move forward? It sounds to me as if there is at least, I would say that on average, people are voting for reforming the large house review process and bylaw.
Mhm.
And that Tom has volunteered to start to work on some kind of language that we will get information about Wellesley's experience and perhaps Brookline's and maybe some other places where it's been applied. I have all the cases in the state. And then we would review that in light of what results.
In light of,
A light of a revision of the bylaw as it stands to bring it more into alignment with what the expectations are of this board based on efficacy.
well, there's 2 things. You know, procedures, policies, submission. You know, procedures in town hall don't need bylaw change. If we're going to change anything in the text of the bylaw, we have to get it ready for springtime meeting. Whether we can do things short of that, like Wellesley has a separate set of rules and regulations, just like we have a subdivision bylaw, but then we have subdivision rules and regulations. You know, maybe that will be a solution. You know, frankly, the Wellesley rules and regulations are full on submission requirements. They're not big on substance of what you can actually decide. So, I mean, but Clark's right, you know, this is a zoning bylaw. If we're going to make changes to the text of it, we got to do it in such a way we prepare for the springtime meeting.
But you've just said that there's 2 pathways. There's changing the bylaw, and then there's whether or not we want to write some specifications that are more precise in the
Yeah,
operation of the existing bylaw.
Well, perhaps, but right now, all of our specifications for this bylaw and what's to be submitted are in the text of the bylaw itself. So if we make any changes to that, we're going, you know, we didn't go the route of having a bylaw that's very short, sweet, and general, and then having some detailed rules and regulations. We could, but there still would need to be some textual changes to the bylaw itself, which may go to town meeting as something we describe as housekeeping rather than substantive, but we probably are going, you know, any changes are probably going to be done and that we're going to need to go to town meeting one way or the other. So that should be the end point of what we're looking at.
So are you making a recommendation?
I'm making a recommendation that myself and anybody else who'd like to start looking at other alternatives. I'm sitting here looking at the table of contents of the Brookline zoning bylaw. I'm not finding anything that says large home review specifically.
They don't.
Weston has had it as long as we've had it, because Weston was the model in 2005. Again, Wellesley is the model for what our current text is. I'm glad to look at anybody's bylaw. They're easy to find, these bylaws. If there's other towns that people know have something like this, let me know. And I'll look.
So how about if we make a subcommittee of the planning board that will work on reform of the bylaw? And the options that are there, it seems, are planning to go to Springtown meeting on other activities that we could do without having to bring it before town meeting. Clark?
I hit the raise hand button first time. Hey, I really think that if Tom's on the ZAC, the Zoning Advisory Committee, that's the best place to work on it rather than another subcommittee. I just, we're all got a bunch of subcommittees, right? And I think that the diverse backgrounds of everybody on the ZAC is going to help temper whatever Tom comes up with in a good way. Right?
Well, as a matter of fact, the working group is, as I reported to them in our meeting, was it Monday? Yeah, Monday. The possible reform of large home review is on the short-term track, meaning possible that something will go in front of the Springtown meeting. And the working group is first waiting for us as a board, planning board, to decide what direction we want to go with. Reform it or eliminate it. So we're in the direction of reform it. So now I'll go back to the zoning group. And there's both, I'm on it, Woody's on it. We all have a lot of thoughts about it. There's some new blood on it that has new thoughts about it. That's fine. I don't care who writes it.
Well, also
the only help I can go online and look at a bylaw and read a bylaw. What I can't do when I don't have a lot of time in my day is to call a town planner and find out how it actually works in another community, which is a valuable thing to find out. Because just like I said before, Wellesley has the same bylaw we do right now. And if they can do it better than we can, then let's find out what they're doing.
All right.
And that's where I'll ask for Lauren and Jen's help, is that, call Weston, call Wellesley, Brookline. If I find something here in Brookline that's relevant, call Brookline.
I was already going to call Brookline for something else.
Go ahead.
So I can do that. I think, Clark, are you finished?
No, I just wanted to say there's at least a half a dozen other opportunities between now and Springtown meeting for this board to weigh in on the large home review when there's some additional thinking that takes place, and it is a process that essentially has to start with a draft or a goal in January. So we're not under the gun. That's all I wanted to say.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
You'll have it before that.
Amy, I raised my hand, but I can't find the bloody button.
It's all the way, open your panel, hit participants,
Yeah, hit
and on the right side, it should say raise hand. We're
All right.
underneath the names.
All right, this one keeps, it does that and then blocks the whole screen. Anyway, I'll just put my last question is, listening to Tom, and I appreciate the fact that I'm for beefing up the law. I mean, I've been that way since the beginning of this meeting. But just a question. If we're looking at other models, is it possible that Cohasset could be a model? That's just it might be a stupid question, but is it possible that we could be a model? We could add on to what others have done and maybe, we take the lead for a change.
Well, if we want to make it a special permit process, as it originally was drafted, yes, we would be taking the lead in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm almost sure of that. But
And
that requires a legal opinion from either Durensis, Karas, or a combination of people of whether we can actually go the special permit route. So
I think Durensis would be
that's
a
a
good.
simple question. So
No, so I don't see why we shouldn't take the lead in it then.
Okay.
And that bears to passing down some of our responsibilities to future boards.
all right. That's
Right.
one.
So can we, is there a sentiment that we might want to draw this conversation to a close with the notion that Tom's going to be starting to work on revisions in language. Some of us are going to go and find the examples that exist and provide him with that information, working in coordination with Lauren and Jen in doing that. And that we're going to have another discussion, which is about practice and procedures, and that will be held probably sometime in November.
Sounds good.
Good.
All right. Clark? You look like you wanted to say something.
Oh, I know that Jen sent over some finished meeting minutes, and I don't know if everyone, if we wanted to vote on that and then vote to adjourn, is that where we're headed at
That is correct.
10:30? Okay, that's fine.
All right. So,
Move to
Second
approve
here.
the two sets of minutes that were submitted to us. I think they were June 17th and July 15th.
Correct.
A second.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Paul Caleri, aye.
Eric Potter,
Eric Potter, aye.
Amy Glassmeyer, aye. All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
May I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Clark. All in favor, please say your name and your vote.
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Caleri,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter.
Eric Potter needs some work here with his
Yeah,
back,
what did-
but he does say aye.
Did you get in a fist fight?
I don't know, but it doesn't look good right now.
Ah,
But I
Okay.
do say aye. I got to go to bed, it looks like.
Right, and I vote aye.
Holy cow.
Thank you all for a very stimulating discussion.
Good night, everybody.
And
Good night, everybody.
we will see you in 2 weeks.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Good night. Good night, Jen. Good night, Bob
Good night.
Egan.
Okay, good night, Amy. Thank you.